Hey everyone, Chris Campbell here with Resolutions Counseling and the Resolutions Podcast. And today I want to talk a bit about stress management. Now, when we hear the word stress, that usually is a word that we want to step back from, we recoil from. There's a lot of negative connotations associated with that word. A lot of us, even though we know stress is a 5-letter word, we would consider it a 4-letter word. But what I want to suggest is stress is really not necessarily a bad word or a bad thing for that matter. You may not realize this, but the human psyche is actually designed to absorb stress and convert stress in a catalytic way that produces several positive things in our life, like resiliency and confidence and competence and self-efficacy. But when stress is not properly managed, or when stress exceeds a certain limit, the human psyche is tipped over into anxiety. And that, as we know, produces all kinds of problems and challenges in our life. So today, as we try to reframe the way that we think of stress and the way that we address stress, I want to give you an example to consider where we're going to compare stress to a payload on a work pickup truck. Now, I want you to imagine in your mind a full-size contractor's work pickup truck. I'm not talking about a boy toy that are these, jacked up, detailed, spotless vehicles that never are used for hauling. They never see off-road. But I'm talking about a truck in its truest sense and how it was meant to be used to haul things. And maybe you've owned a full-size truck like this. Maybe you've driven one before. Maybe you've ridden in one before. But here's what I will tell you. The way those trucks are designed, they don't drive quite right and they don't ride quite right without there actually being a payload. And the same can be true for human beings. We are built to carry a certain capacity of stress that actually serves as a motivator and a way that helps us and teaches us to navigate through life experience with a certain amount of skill. And the problem is, in the case of a contractor's pickup truck, if you've ever driven one that now exceeds the payload, the recommended payload, what begins to happen is you put the suspension, the frame, the drivetrain under damaging duress. And in the same way, we as human beings, when we take on too much stress, the payload exceeds the recommended limit, what begins to happen is we put our physical bodies, our psyches, our spirits under damaging duress. And so today, what I want to do with this Healthy Harrison tip is to share with you a simple 5-step process for addressing stress when you feel pushed to the limit of your payload. Step number 1. When you feel the onset of stress in a heavy way, maybe it's pushing you into anxiety, maybe the brink of panic, the first step you can take is to pause and breathe. Pause and intentionally breathe. Now, you can Google, I'm sure, and find dozens, if not hundreds of ways for therapeutic breathing exercises, and I welcome you, I'd encourage you to do that. But the basics of this purpose of managing stress, the basics of this first step, is just really to interrupt what is subconsciously being controlled in your body. So when you pause and breathe, I would encourage you to do so in a repetitive way where you're taking really deep inhales and you're exhaling with thrust. Let me just demonstrate. Now, that may seem, really over-exaggerated, and you may go, why in the world would I need to do such a thing? Well, what's actually happening is you're allowing conscious control to take back over your body. You see, subconsciously, our nervous system is monitoring our respiratory system. And when your body begins to pick up on stress and anxiety, your body interprets that as a threat. And what it begins to do is begin to ready itself to shift into survival mode. And by that, we mean bracing for a potential impact or a confrontation that in order to survive, you would either need to fight, you'd either need to flee, or you'd either need to freeze. And so when your body begins to pick up on signs of stress, your subconscious kicks in and your heartbeat quickens, your breathing becomes a little more shallow, your blood pumps at a higher pressure, your muscles begin to contract, your sweat glands open up because you are ready to survive in a moment's notice. That does not work for stress management. So when you purposely override the subconscious control of your breathing, you are restoring your capacity to critically think back to the front or the prefrontal cortex of your mind. Step 1, stop and breathe, which brings us to step 2. And step 2 in stress management is after you've interrupted the nervous system's response or reaction to stress, is now you free yourself up to think and don't just feel. Step 1 is pause and breathe. Step 2 is remember to think. Don't just feel. You know, our feelings are to our mental psyche what our central nervous system is to our bodies. And you know that our central nervous systems are designed to give us a sense of pain or discomfort when there's something that is risky potentially that's happening that our body is encountering. If I lit a candle and set it up in front of this candle and in front of this camera and I passed my finger back and forth over that flame, everything would be fine until I paused over the flame. And then immediately the nerve endings in my finger would send a jolt of pain up my arm, through my spinal cord, into the base of my brain saying, ouch, and quickly I would know to remove my finger, my part of my physical body from that danger. And in the same way, our emotions pick up on negativity that will alert our psyche, hey, that there's something here that we need to pay attention to that is potentially damaging. But if you're not careful, that moment of warning will be hijacked by your emotions, and you'll not be able to stop and think yourself through it. So we say step 1, pause and breathe, interrupt that nervous system response, and then step 2, remember to think and don't just feel. Pause, survey your circumstance, do an inventory of what's going on, and begin to take note of your resources and things that might be an advantage or a disadvantage to you. Step 3, in the middle of thinking and not just feeling, remind yourself not to catastrophize. You know, overwhelmingly, the majority of the things in the situations, the circumstances that trigger stress, an overload of stress or anxiety, even panic in our life, prove to be really not on a catastrophic level. But if you don't interrupt your nervous response, if you don't stop and think, if your emotions are hijacking your reaction, you will shift into survival mode to where you will brace for the worst possible impact, and you'll begin to imagine worst case scenarios on a catastrophic level. You cannot do that and manage your stress well. So step 3 is remind yourself this isn't necessarily a catastrophe. Pause and breathe. Remember to think, don't just feel, and don't catastrophize. Step 4 is control what you can. Control what you can. Now, in no way, as a professional counselor, am I encouraging you to be a controlling person. But what I am encouraging you to do is to begin to think through, okay, what is within my realm of control as far as facing this stress and managing this stress and bringing that payload down to a manageable weight. Sometimes that means we need to survey and say, maybe I need to ask for additional help. Or maybe I've not been managing my rest and recovery, my sleep very well. Maybe it has something to do with the way that I'm fueling my body or things that I'm taking into my body to cope. Maybe the things that we can control are right boundaries that we can set on a professional level or an interpersonal level with other people. But there are certain things that are within our control, even in a situation that we may feel lies outside of our control, that will help us manage the stress in the moment and rightfully navigate our way through. So the first 4 steps are pause and breathe, think, don't just feel, it's not a catastrophe, and control what you can. And this brings us to step 5. And step 5 addresses those things that we would recognize as being outside of our control. This is an opportunity for us to engage our faith. Now, resolutions counseling and my own personal counseling strategy allows for and even emphasizes the holistic nature of human beings. I believe that we are essentially body and psyche and spirit. And so therefore, since there's a spiritual component to who we are, it allows us opportunity to engage our faith. And sometimes well-meaning people, or even in a moment of panic, we want to jump to step 5 immediately. And so we make outcries of prayer. I've heard old timers call it foxhole prayers, to where you're just praying in whatever way you can to get out of a crisis situation. Or maybe you grab a Bible and you're just randomly flipping through it, trying to find some sort of verse that's going to magically cure your symptom of anxiety. And I guess there are times where that could provide a certain amount of stress management and could help us with our self-regulation. But I would just tell you from a professional standpoint that when you jump ahead to step 5 before doing the first 4 simple steps of stress management, engaging your faith is going to have limited outcome of success. But with that said, we do encourage you to engage your faith. We do encourage you to practice the spirituality, that you've been integrated with. And if you've not addressed that particular aspect of your life yet, we would encourage you to do so in an integrated way. Remember that you are holistic as a human being. And what you want to do is you want to set yourself up for a win, especially when it comes for stress, by managing your payload. When you do, you're going to drive much better. You're going to be able to navigate through life successfully. So, in review, 5 steps for managing stress. Pause and breathe. Remember to think, don't just feel. Remind yourself, this isn't a catastrophe. Control what you can, and then engage your faith. And that is your Healthy Harrison tip for today. This is Chris Campbell with the Resolutions Podcast and Resolutions Counseling, Inc.